Are back on the conversation. Now joining us, our own managing editor, Jonathan Larson. He broke a story today about how Mike Lindell got radicalized by a group called The Family. They run the National Prayer Breakfast. It's got so many different components of the story, including Mike Lindell himself yelling at Jonathan. So that's a fun part of the story. Jonathan, welcome back.
Thank you.
All right, so let's start with Lindell. I honestly did not know until I read your story that he was not always evangelical. So tell us how he got to be the way that he is.
So it's as you alluded to, it's a complicated, kind of amazing story. He in 2014 met Stephen Baldwin, the Christian actor. What we found out was that a year before Lindell met Stephen Baldwin had set up a nonprofit called Friends of Stephen Baldwin Ministry, and the three principles of that nonprofit were all tied to some extent to the family. That's the secretive religious group based in Washington that has people around the world that also runs the National Prayer Breakfast. So some of those people who were in Stephen Baldwin's orbit, based on tax filings we ended up finding and business records, things like that. Some of those same family folks ended up connected to Lindell. And in 2016, Lindell told me at the last minute he was invited to that year's prayer breakfast. And at that year's prayer breakfast, he had a number of experiences which, in his own words, began to set him on a path towards where he is now. He describes himself roughly prior to 2015 or so as apolitical. He literally says in his book, I didn't know the difference between a Republican and a Democrat. And he's like, yeah, I guess I'm Christian. Sure, why not? And he had a number of experiences that were facilitated by members of the family, including 1 year after the prayer breakfast, someone he appears to have met at the prayer breakfast who ended up on his board. This was on his nonprofit board. This was a guy who was on the board of the family. The family's legal entity is called the Fellowship Foundation. This guy was a PR guy who's on that board, now both boards, Lindell and the families, and he's literally the spokesperson for the family. He suggests that Lindell go to this sort of like a retreat. It's like a program for military veterans who are suffering PTSD. And they use Christ. They use Jesus, accepting Jesus as your savior. That's part of how they bring peace and comfort to these. It's called Restored Warrior, Operation Restored Warrior, and they talk about the pain that they've experienced. And in Lindell's book, in his own words, I should say, I don't recall if it's in the book, he says, I did a complete surrender. I fell to my knees. The guy running the program had ties to the family, and it was the family board member who suggested that he attend this program. And so they essentially engineered, might be slightly too strong a word, but maybe not, engineered this guy's political radicalization. They talked at the prayer breakfast. Lindell describes in his book how the prayer breakfast leadership wanted him, actually this is a separate source who told me this, Ben Carson's former campaign manager at the time told me that the NPB, the prayer breakfast leadership, specifically requested that Carson and Lindell be brought together. And during that prayer session meeting, Lindell writes in his book, he began to understand, his eyes were opened, and everyone in the room agreed that the upcoming 2016 election would either take America down a path of renewal or further down the dark path that it had already been on after kicking God out of the public square. So all of these things were inculcated in Lindell at the prayer breakfast meeting, which the Carson campaign manager told me the prayer breakfast leadership wanted to happen. And as Lindell says in his book, everyone in that prayer breakfast group, this is a little side group off to the side of the main event, after the main event, they all agreed that it was either a spiritual renewal or dark path, which means everyone in that room was maybe not a Trump fan yet because he was not yet the nominee, but they certainly were on the Republican side, the evangelical right-wing Christian Republican side.
So Jonathan, it's a funny question to ask from a guy who was screamed at by Mike Lindell a couple of days ago. But as I read the story and we talked about it on the Young Turks, I thought this guy has kind of a childlike innocence. It seems like that the family, which by the way is that National Prayer Breakfast attended by Republicans and Democrats, Obama, the Clintons, and so tons of Democrats still go to and validate this group that spawned Mike Lindell in a sense. It looked like they hoodwinked Lindell and they did it for the big pillow money.
So the big pillow money, right? So it's very hard to divine motive, no pun intended. But we did find that. Well, I had a source close to the family who told me that the people who had been in Stephen Baldwin's orbit and then ended up close to Lindell, at least one of them did, that they were sort of known for using the breakfast to try to reel in folks who might become their patrons, who they didn't necessarily have that Jesus relationship with yet, and had it a little backwards. The breakfast is supposed to celebrate that relationship, at least in the family's thinking. That's not necessarily how the public sees this event. And these guys had a reputation, or at least were thought of as possibly using, like, hey, want to come to the National Prayer Breakfast? President's going to be there. That would be the way they would create these relationships. And what we did find through tax filings and other things was one of the guys who Lindell said he had never even heard of actually was on the board, president of the Lindell Foundation the following year, 2017, and they disclosed paying him $55,000 and change that year. So there's something to that. The family board member, who I mentioned earlier, is a public relations guy. His company has represented both Baldwin, Lindell Foundation, and MyPillow. I'm assuming not for free. And there was another person in there as well who's they had a program about using biblical ideas to foster resilience, and that program sort of ended up on the downward end of some trickle down money that came from the Lindell Foundation. Although I should be clear, the guy who I spoke to about it said that it actually went through his charity to Liberty University. But on the filings, it says, there are various things that suggest that money went to his program. Yeah. That said, I do want to disabuse you though, Cenk. One of the things, we've been researching lots of people connected to the breakfast based on these documents that we have. And so I'll go and look at their blog posts and their websites for their very modest mission work, their nonprofits, and they all seem about as genuine as you could want, assuming you're a religious person. And it's not the cartoons of televangelists putting hands on people and stuff like that. So whether it's hoodwinked or that's just the nature of how these relationships work, I'm not maybe fit to judge. But you could certainly make the case that like Lindell wasn't exactly driving his own boat here.
Yeah, and so I get it. Look, they're evangelicals, they're gonna go for evangelical causes. And of course, the underlying problem is that one of those causes is, as an example, anti-LGBTQ rights, and Democrats shouldn't support that. So, and they shouldn't support an organization that's so in bed with Mike Lindell. But Jonathan's got these documents about the family. Keep reading it. Go to TYT.com, go to Investigates. You'll see all these amazing stories, and shows you how the right wing works behind the scenes and how sometimes Democrats accidentally help it. But before we run out of time, which we're very close to, you called Mike Lindell, as a normal reporter would, to get confirmation on some of these facts. And
I actually sent a bunch of emails to MyPillow, which is like the only contact information for these various entities he has. And then he ended up emailing me and asking for my number. So he ended up calling me.
Okay, got you. He calls you and you're asking for confirmation of things, again, like anybody would. Where does it break down and when does he start screaming at you and why?
So one of the emails that we sent to MyPillow, which was actually not really about him. So I was taken aback because I didn't understand what he was talking about because we had sent lengthy questions about him. One of the questions about someone else at his company, he accused me of lying about, and he was right that we got it wrong in the email. I got it wrong in the email, but of course that's why you send these emails is to check and make sure that the parties involved have a chance to say, no, actually that's wrong. I think he took it as proof that I was going to lie and make stuff up. And then it was interesting because then, I asked him, so he was calling me, I'm not even sure if I can say the words on the air, but anyway.
Yeah, no, we said it, lying scumbag.
Yes, scumbag was repeated, pawn scum I think was in there, liar, where do you get these lies, stuff like that. So he, at one point, I said something like, can you explain to me how you got invited to the 2016 National Prayer Breakfast? And again, he was like, see, where do you come up with this stuff? I wasn't at the 2016 Prayer Breakfast. To which I responded, you write in your book that you had conversations there about the upcoming 2016 election. And he's like, oh yeah, all right. And then I asked him about this guy who ended up running his foundation, president of his foundation, and I said, you paid him $55,000. And he said, where do you get these lies? And I responded, it's your own nonprofit's tax filings. So it seems to me possible that, and he even told me at some point, like, we haven't done anything with the foundation for 4 years. Well, after that 4-year period, more recently than that 4-year period, there have still been people from the family involved with the nonprofit, and money has been going to evangelical causes. So it's hard for me not to wonder if he hadn't hung up, whether we would have found out that maybe he wasn't aware of some of the things his own foundation was doing. He seems to have thought it was defunct. They've continued filing tax filings, disclosing revenues, paying expenses, making distributions, all of that stuff. So someone's doing something with it.
Yeah, I mean, if he has a rational bone left in his body, he might want to look at how they're spending his money at his foundation, and he might find out some interesting things hidden under that pillow. All right, and TYT.com, go to Investigates. Jonathan, you want to give a quick shout out to some folks who helped you on the story?
Yeah, our news assistant, Zoltan Lucas, and our intern, Jamia Zarzuela, both just absolutely stepped up. As you know, we were kind of racing to get these stories out so that people would have them in time for Labor Day, and you guys would have them in time for the show. So they totally stepped up, and I just wanted to acknowledge that.
That's awesome. All right, Jonathan Larson, managing editor for TYT Investigates. Thank you. We appreciate it. We'll see you next time. Thanks for watching The Young Turks. Really appreciate it. Another way to show support is through YouTube memberships. You'll get to interact with us more. There's live chat emojis, badges. You've got emojis of me, Anna, John, JR. So those are super fun. But you also get playback of our exclusive member-only shows and specials right after they air. So all of that, all you gotta do is click that join button right underneath the video. Thank you.